Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Dave. How are you this morning?
Doing well. How are you?
Okay, I thought about you last night. I was at my first tribe game, and so I wondered if you were up there in the elite seats, but I looked up and I couldn't see you, so I gave up.
Nope. I'll be there
Nope.
Sunday.
Sunday. Okay. How are you enjoying it?
Pretty much. I'll go over that with you sometime soon.
Okay. Love to do that.
Yeah.
Well, we're queuing up here.
I hope we have some visitors.
Oh, we do. Ellen, Herb Moss, Gary Hollow, Stan Morris. So yeah.
Okay.
We are doing well. Good morning, Morris. Dave, here's Dave Bodemer coming on. So yeah, we're getting good attendance here today.
I hope Mr. Epplin shows up.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. He indicated to you he was planning on doing it, correct? Did I remember correctly the email?
Yes. And I included his email with the one I sent out now 3 times.
Okay.
Maybe I should have sent one directly to him.
Well, we're up to 8 now. Hi, Dave.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Dave.
Good morning.
Hi, Morris. How are you?
I'm good.
Stand up in fear.
Always helps to put the earbuds in.
Yeah, it has been known to help.
Yeah.
Nothing
I like
more
your shirt.
awkward than when you first sign into a Zoom conference because you don't know what your volume is and all that other fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Hi, Ryan.
Morning.
Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Joe. How are you?
Fine. How are you today, sir?
Good, good. Morning, Stan.
This may
Morning,
sound
John.
silly, but
Morning, guys.
I want to know what book we're talking about today. What book are we going to be discussing?
It'll be this book, Luke Epplin's Our Team,
Oh, okay.
which is about the 1948 Indians. And we're hoping that Mr. Epplin is joining us soon.
I haven't read that one yet. It's in the queue.
Okay. Okay. There'll be a test at the end and you'll do badly.
I will. Yes. As long as the loser gets a copy of the book, I'm great.
Well, I might be willing to do that. Yeah, I'm done with mine, so I'll be happy to loan it to you.
Sure. No.
Spoiler alert, the Indians did win the 1948 World Series.
No.
Right.
Really?
Well, that actually, Dave, what I read was the Department of Justice has opened up a case to relook at that to see if there weren't some shenanigans going on.
Improper
Oh.
use of naval material.
Yeah, right.
You took the words out of my mouth, Dave.
They'd had replay, the Indians would have won in 5.
Are they investigating Gene Bearden's spin rate?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he had a spin rate of 0.
Negative.
Knuckleballer.
Well, Dave, Mr. Scott, sir, we're up to well, here comes Luke Epplin.
Excellent.
Great.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Man, they are lining up at the door. Holy moly, 13.
There's a door.
Yeah, there's an intellectual door here.
Virtual door.
Good morning, Luke.
Hey,
Hi, Luke.
how's it going?
Good to see you.
Hi.
Hey, you guys.
Good morning.
Hey,
Luke, when we get started, would you like to start off with something or just hear the questions from the panel?
oh, I mean, I guess we'll just go right to the questions.
Okay. Okay.
Running into your talks on on Baseball by the Book in the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah. That was great.
You're in New York?
Yeah, I'm from St. Louis. I moved to New York. I work in book publishing. I live in Queens, but I moved to Cleveland for a while whenever I did this book. So I lived in the Shaker Square area.
Oh,
very
okay.
cool.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you how you chose this as a subject.
Yeah, we can get into that. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
that'd be interesting.
Yeah, because I have no connection to Cleveland at all. I have no relatives that live there. I think I was in Cleveland once before I started this book, and that was it.
Well, let's kick it off. Go ahead and roll into it.
So
Okay.
we'll give you a fine Cleveland welcome. Welcome to Cleveland. Now leave. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Hey, thanks. That's great. Yeah. Did you want to say how I got the connection to Cleveland?
Yeah, that'd
Yes,
be great.
please.
Okay, so I grew up in a small town in Southern Illinois. It's about an hour or so from St. Louis. My dad had season tickets to the Cardinals with a bunch of other people, and so I went to maybe like 5 to 10 games a year growing up. But the way that it kind of came about was that my grandpa would have been in his 20s when World War II happened. He was partially deaf, and so he was 4F during the war. Instead, he went to St. Louis and he worked in an airplane manufacturing plant. And after his shift was over, he often hopped streetcars and went to Sportsman's Park in St. Louis.
Daily News and the New York Times
And,
as a leader whose ideas and
oops, is that mine?
experience stand out. Catherine Garcia is New
Sorry.
York's best.
So he would go to Sportsman's Park often, and he was a big St. Louis Browns fan. You guys probably all know that St. Louis had two teams back then: the St. Louis Browns, St. Louis Cardinals. He was a very odd person in that he was a Browns fan. The Browns were usually terrible. And so whenever I was growing up, he would tell me stories about the St. Louis Browns. And so I was more interested in that team and where they went and their history in St. Louis, which is kind of non-existent now. And I wanted to write a book about the Browns. Everybody knows that the last owner of the Browns was Bill Beck. I thought that the book was really going to center on Beck and his ways of trying to keep the Browns in St. Louis, which I thought would have been an interesting sliding door scenario if he was able to do that. But once I started researching Beck, I went to the New York Public Library. They have like bound galleys of the sporting news. It's really great. You can go there and just like order a year. So like 1946, 47, or 48. And you can sort of flip through the sporting news that year as though you were reading a novel. It's really a great way to read the sporting news, as opposed to like perhaps going onto the SABR website like we all do to just kind of get articles here and there. And so I was sort of reading through all of 46, all of 47, and all of 48, and sort of seeing these names come to the forefront, like Feller, Page, Doby, Beck. And I was noticing that like you've got two white men, two black men, and I was seeing the ways that they each sort of represented a different phase of the integration experience that was happening at that time. You've got sort of Beck as the more progressive white individual, Feller is the more traditionalist. You got Doby and Page on sort of opposite ends of the generational spectrum of African-American players. And I thought that if you put those four people in tension with each other, that you could have, you know, kind of an interesting story to tell. And so I completely dropped the Browns idea, which was never going to get bought by a publisher anyway, and shifted to Cleveland.
How did you establish the narratives?
That's a long sort of question. The original book proposal that got sold had the narrative starting in 1947. The first chapter of the book was supposed to be Doby sort of journeying overnight from Newark to Cleveland, and then it was going to be a straightforward sort of narrative that encompassed the 1947 and the 1948 seasons, flashing back as necessary to sort of fill in these individuals' past. I always had the four people as the protagonists of the book, but yeah, it was supposed to be a much more straightforward story told through these two seasons. And then as I was researching, I was just kind of like, you can't understand who these individuals are if you don't if you don't show the war, if you don't sort of see how that shaped them. And then I was also thinking that like these individuals were, if not coming in direct contact with each other as like Feller and Page were, and Page and Beck were, they were sort of like having experiences that sort of rhymed with each other. So you had like Feller and Dobie going to basically the same place in the South Pacific, but having vastly different experiences at that time. And you had sort of just like, it's almost like they were kind of circling each other throughout these periods. You had Dobie and Page playing each other in the 1946 Negro League World Series, all these sorts of things where you could establish that these men were crisscrossing as they came sort of barreling toward each other on the Indians.
Did you have people ask you why Cleveland?
Well, I have people ask me that now. Yeah, it's I don't. I mean, it's an odd sort of thing. Like as someone like me who grew up in St. Louis with no connection to the Indians and no real knowledge of this story outside of, you know, just vague parameters of it. I knew who these four individuals were, but I didn't know anything in depth about their story. I figured that there were just so many other people like me. And in some ways, you all are sort of not the target audience for this book, because I'm sure that you all know this story in tremendous depth. And so there probably wasn't a lot that I had in this book that was like new to you or interesting to you. It would be more someone like me who grew up outside of the Indians fan base and is now sort of encountering this for the first time. And so I wanted to tell it in this like narratively interesting, sort of dramatic way that sort of really focused on the storytelling aspect of it, rather than say the statistical aspect of it, or even the game by game aspect of it. So like, I mean, when I was sort of researching this, I was just getting super excited. I was just like, wow, this is so dramatic. It's so incredible. I mean, even the World Series where Feller ends up losing both of the games he plays and Dobie ends up sort of becoming the hero. And so like the book starts with Feller kind of up here and Dobie kind of down here. And then by the end, they kind of do this switcheroo. And then they have that sort of dramatic moment after the World Series where they shake hands. I was like, this is like a Hollywood script. Like, I mean, it's a real, like everything, even if Feller had won that game one or it gone to extra innings and he got taken out, it wouldn't have been dramatically satisfying. But it's just like, I couldn't have asked for a better story. So after a while, I started not thinking about Cleveland and just thinking about, this is an incredible narrative.
How did you learn about places like Short Vincent and Shaker Heights and that sort of thing?
I mean, it's in the water there. It's you know, I mean, Beck talks about them. I had when I lived in Cleveland, I was set up with some people through friends who sort of walked me through certain places like that. I mean, I'm sure that if someone from Cleveland had written this book, they'd been able to really paint a much richer portrait of Cleveland than I did, because they know the city so well. But you know, I mean, Beck was hanging out on Short Vincent constantly. You got the Hollenden Hotel, which plays a very key role in at this time, and it just kind of felt like it was a city that was you know, I'm from St. Louis, and you go downtown St. Louis, and it's dead. There's just like nobody there. It's like nobody's walking, nobody's kind of out and about. The bars are closed, everything's gone. And then you sort of read these sort of things in the past, and it was like, it was hopping, it was bustling. It felt like New York City almost. People were out and about and things like that. So I know of these cities that like used to have these sort of thriving downtowns that were sort of full of pockets like Short Vincent and things like that, and now are trying to recapture that. So in some ways, Cleveland felt familiar for me for being from St. Louis. I thought that like the arcs of those cities were pretty similar. I'm from the Midwest. I felt like I could sort of slip into it pretty well. The difficulty that I had was getting into the mindset of a Cleveland fan base almost, because like I'm a Cardinals fan, and the Cardinals are a charmed fan base. They are a fan base that wins when they shouldn't. They should not have won in 2011. They should not have won in 1964. They should not have won in 1942. There's like all these sorts of periods of the Cardinals past where they're just continually overcoming the odds in the playoffs. I think that we call it Cardinals devil magic. And the Indians are the opposite of that. The Indians are a cursed franchise. They are losing whenever they shouldn't lose. They're ripping the fans' hearts out. And you see that often in 1948 too, the way the fans are reacting to the Indians. And so it's like a totally different mindset. It's like if the Cardinals make the playoffs, like the fan base is always like, we'll beat the Dodgers. I mean, we have this very sort of arrogance to us, where the Indians have a much more fatalistic, or at least it seemed more fatalistic mindset.
Luke, you talked about learning about Cleveland and learning about the team and the individuals. But having said that, was there anything that really surprised you as you went through this knowledge gathering experience while writing the book that you said, "Gee, I would have never expected blank that I found out"? Anything really jump out at you?
Yeah, I mean, the entirety of Larry Doby's story, again, is somebody who did not grow up marinated in this history the way that I did with the Cardinals, in terms of Musial and Bob Gibson and Lou Brock, all these people that I knew, whose stories I knew very intimately growing up. Having not known anything about Larry Doby's story, I had no idea that he'd even, played on the New York Eagles one day and then the Cleveland Indians the next. I mean, that whole sort of chapter that's in there where Doby is playing a 4th of July game in 1947, rushing to the Newark Penn Station, sitting there and just kind of having it marinate in his head what is going on, just was an incredible thing to do. It's almost, again, cinematic, almost the way that it happens. And then him, showing up the next day in Chicago, signing a contract, and the next hour is in an Indians uniform. It's incredible. I had no idea about any of that.
Well, that was how things operated in the Negro Leagues in those days. Ernie Banks, when he was with the Monarchs, didn't want to leave the Monarchs to go play with the Cubs. It's like, what am I doing in Chicago? So it's a whole different mindset. The Negro Leagues was the major leagues for African Americans at the time, especially teams like Newark that were especially well run.
Yeah, and Doby himself, that's a great point. And Doby himself says that during that 1947 season, there were plenty of clippings in the African American press where Doby longs to be back with the Eagles, where he was playing, where he felt accepted, Doby says, I think that he did an interview with Fay Vincent later in his life where he talked about how he did not aspire to be in the major leagues because he didn't see himself in those players. Like, his aspirations were toward the Negro Leagues. And so that was, the height of the mountain for him in some ways. And so when he makes it to Cleveland, it's a shock. It's a shock to his system in a way. But I mean, that entire sort of Doby story was new to me. I think I'd seen the Steve Gromek photo of Doby. Just if you're a baseball fan, you'll have seen that at some point along the way. And Doby as an answer to a trivia question, but I didn't sort of research it. I hadn't researched it deeply at all. So yeah, again, in some ways, I'm coming at it from as somebody who is just discovering it for the first time and being just kind of floored by it. And so I think that kind of went into my narrative style, which was maybe a little florid, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this story is incredible.
Is there enough information out there to write a book about Effa Manley?
Yeah, in fact, there's been 3 biographies of her. I'm blanking on some of the names here, but the last one was actually published this year by a woman named Andrea Williams, and it's fantastic. The Effa Manley papers are at the Newark Public Library. And those were some of the most extensive papers that I was able to research there. She kept not only copies of letters sent to her, but she made copies of the letters that she sent out. And so you have both incoming and outgoing letters to her. So you have sort of these great letters that she's writing to her husband, Abe, while he's in spring training with the Eagles throughout the years. You have letters that Satchel Paige has sent to her, letters that she sent to Satchel Paige. And for my own purposes, the sort of great letters that you have are that whenever Branch Rickey is taking Don Newcomb from the Newark Eagles in 1946 without even contacting her or compensating her, you have her sort of processing this through letter. And obviously, not a lot of that kind of came in because the Don Newcomb stuff was a little bit tangential to the story I'm telling, but like they're tremendous. I mean, she's both sort of expressing rage. She's expressing sort of like confusion about why they'd choose Don Newcomb, who she did not consider to be sort of the top tier of players on her team. He was a very young man at that time. He was inconsistent. And so you get all of these great letters of her trying to figure out what it means. And then whenever it's sort of finalized, you get sort of sadness, her sort of realizing that if this is the way it's going to be, if Branch Rickey's just going to come in and sort of pick and choose all these great players, she's no longer going to have a team. Like she can just sort of see the future and be like, well, our team is going to dissolve if this is what happens. And so those are fantastic letters. Unfortunately, the letters cut off in 1946. So you do not have the letters that she wrote in 1947 whenever Bill Veeck was purchasing Larry Doby. I've asked the librarians and they say that this is the as far as the collection extends, but they extend all the way back to 1935, which is whenever she and Abe Manley buy the Eagles and go through 1946. So you've got 10 years of letters there, and I can't remember how many boxes there are, but it's an extensive collection. It's really great. If you're ever in Newark, it's fantastic.
Gary, how long did you research this book before you put Proverbial Pen to paper?
Well, I had a contract that said that I needed to deliver it in 2 years, but I took 5. So I had a very understanding editor. It kept getting pushed back. So yeah, I mean, I think I researched for a year and then I started writing and then I sort of realized I needed more. So I just it was just sort of continuous. And this was my first book. So I didn't know how to write a book. I think that the original book was twice as long as this book is now. I think it was close to 200,000 words, and my contract said that it should be 100,000 words. So we had to get it down to about that length. So the book feels a little skeletal to me, but we had to do that. I think that the original book had 32 chapters, and I think this one has 25 or something. So we cut out a lot.
Give us some of the stuff you left out.
I had chapters on each of the 3 men who went to war, a sort of a chapter on each of them. The Bob Feller thing, there's a woman who, when Bob Feller went to war on the USS Alabama, there was a woman who in the 90s, her dad had just died and he was on the USS Alabama. And so she took like 2 years to just go around to all the men that were still alive on the USS Alabama and do long oral histories with them. And she self-published the book through her house. It's just kind of like, it's like a 200-page book that she made herself through a local printing company. And I don't know how I found out about this, but I did. And she still had some copies. She sent them to me. And I don't think anybody had ever seen these things before. And there was tremendous information in there about Bob Feller, just stuff that I'm not sure anybody had seen before. And so I did a much longer stuff on that. And I remember my editor told me, he was like, look, you could go down a rabbit hole on World War II and it would be great. But he's like, is this really the story you're telling? And so he took out most of the World War II stuff. He's just like, you've got to get in and out of the war. I had the entire Negro League World Series from 1946, every single game, sort of game by game. I did all of the Bob Feller 1946 barnstorming tour, sort of game by game by game. We were just kind of taking stuff like that out. And, I mean, one of the things that I definitely wanted to do and that my editor also wanted to do was, I'm telling a sort of much larger, just kind of, I don't want to say surface, but sort of like I'm trying to hook readers through the narrative. And so my editor always said, like, if people want to know the statistics or the games or something like that, they can go online, Baseball Reference is there. They can definitely figure all this stuff out. They can look at what Lou Boudreau batted in 1948 or something like that. You should just really be focusing on propelling the narrative forward. And so, we definitely tried to take out the fat that might have been sort of tangential. But, I mean, the sort of downside of that is that whenever I read this now, and I've had to for certain events, I just see what's not there. And I just see, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have kept that. Oh, geez. Yeah. So yeah, that happens. Have you all wrote books or anything or?
No.
No. All right. Yeah.
Well, I
Newspaper.
think we've got one gentleman by name of Morris who might have a
Hmm.
little history there in writing books.
Yeah. Morris, I visited him when I was living in Cleveland.
Right.
Yeah. Didn't I put you in the acknowledgements?
You did. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I hope you got the email I sent you last night. I thought you did an excellent job.
Oh, thanks, Morris.
You know, in addition to my writing, I've judged for the Seymour Medal and I've judged for the the Casey Award, and I think your book measures up with winners and contenders from the past. So I hope it will get judged accordingly when the next award season comes around.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't able to go to Cleveland this time because of COVID and all that. Nobody's doing book tours, but the paperback comes out next year in March or April. I'm not sure. So hopefully we'll be swinging through Cleveland. So I'll definitely try to meet up with you then whenever I get there.
You know, Luke, go ahead.
Okay, some baseball. I mean, was there any, I realized there was second guessing when we started Beard in the playoff game. Was there any mention of starting Satchel Paige at all? And then in the World Series, Satchel only pitched 2/3 of an inning over 6 games. Was there any criticism or any, you know, anything of, you know, Paige pitching that game, the playoff game, or
Right? No, there really wasn't. Paige had I mean, you know, I really tried to sort of like give a sense of like how thrilling it was for the entire country whenever Paige came to the Indians, and like that sort of incredible run he had throughout August where like people were literally tearing the turnstiles out to see him pitch. But in September, he had a real sort of downswing. He got beat, or he didn't get beat. I think he just got knocked out by the Browns twice in September. He wasn't nearly as effective. He was giving up runs and a lot of his relief stuff that he was pitching. And I think his last appearance was either September 14th or September 16th. And then Boudreaux didn't use him at all down the stretch. There was this sort of sense that the magic kind of was deserting him, or batters were figuring him out, things like that. So by the time that the World Series came along, he'd sort of fallen so far out of the rotation that not even the African-American press were really being like, you know, maybe he's going to start or something like that. It just didn't seem like he was factoring into the rotation as much anymore. So yeah, but I mean, Paige himself, I mean, in addition to what he says in his autobiography about really wanting to pitch, like whenever, I can't remember what paper it is. I think it's the Boston Herald. Whenever Boudreaux names Steve Gromek the pitcher of Game 4, a Boston reporter has the foresight to go to Paige and say, "What do you think about this?" And Paige says, "Oh, Gromek's pitching. Okay, well, I guess, you know, that's all right. I guess it's okay." But you can tell Paige is like, he's either pissed or hurt. So that's like a great sort of, you know, Paige is trying to cover his feelings, but he's not doing a good job.
You know, Luke, I really thoroughly enjoyed the book, and in my case, not being an author, but I couldn't put not the book down, but my Kindle down from once I started reading it, and I really enjoyed the pictures at the back too. But one of the things that really intrigued me was the complexity. Maybe this is my naivete or ignorance, but the complexity of Bob Feller.
Yeah.
I really didn't appreciate how complex a person he was until your book. So I thank you for the book and thank you for that insight. And it was just fascinating. I never thought he was as complex as he was.
Yeah, I mean, Feller, I was really worried about how I was going to portray Feller because, you know, I mean, particularly in the environment that we're in right now, I've had just a lot of people sort of write him off as a racist or, you know, want to sort of take him as a black and white character, and
Yeah.
he's just not. And I wanted to show that even though he does make statements, basically throughout his life that are unfortunate and that he really probably should have thought more about, he himself does tremendous strides in helping integration, and he himself is so savvy about thinking of himself as a brand, an entrepreneur, thinking of the ways that he can sort of advance himself based on his own life story, based on sort of like what's in the country at the time, whether it's the Depression or the war, or even after the war, whenever people are starting businesses and families and stuff like that. Like Feller changes with the times almost instinctively, but it's like there's an intelligence to him that I think often gets lost, especially toward the end. And even at the end, there's an article from the 70s in the Los Angeles Times. I wish I could send it to y'all, but it's like a reporter from the Los Angeles Times is following Feller in the summer as he's sort of making these stops along the minor league circuit. And he's basically just like setting up a card table, putting up a sign, and it says like Bob Feller, $10. And like people can just come up to him and get something signed. And like the way that this article is written, it's like, can you believe how far this man has fallen? And it's kind of like, it's undignified what he's doing. It's like, it's a very judgmental article about what he's become. But what this person is not seeing is that like, he's ahead of his time. Like everybody's going to start doing this. Like Bob Feller is creating this idea that like you can, and in your later career, you can sustain yourself by doing this, by selling your autograph, by being Bob Feller. Like he is sort of continually a step ahead of everybody. And like yeah, I mean, he sort of set that template too for an athlete just kind of roving the country and selling himself. So yeah, I mean, his intelligence is extraordinary.
He was doing that to the very end. You could see him doing that at spring
Yes,
training.
he was.
Yeah, I talked to somebody because he sold insurance in the 50s and 60s. And I talked to somebody who knew him at that time. And they said that, I mean, obviously I didn't get in this in the book because my book basically ends in 1948. But they said that like he was continually, like if somebody called him and been like, can you talk to the Kiwanis Club in Dayton? He'd be like, yeah, I'll be there. And it'd be like 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. And his boss would always be like, now, Bob, you can't do this. You have to do your job. Like you're here selling insurance. And he was always just jetting around. And they said that he just hadn't come to the realization yet that his only job in life was being Bob Feller. And once he could do that, that's whenever he found his purpose. So yeah, he made that his career, just being Bob Feller. And he was being Bob Feller basically by the age of like 15 almost. Like it was a lifelong occupation.
Does anyone have some 1948 stories to share with Luke?
Well, I have a question before we get to that
Okay.
about Feller, because Luke, I know you referenced biographies of you mentioned that all of these guys have their biographies, and there's a good biography of Feller by John Sickles.
Yeah.
But I'm one of the things I was surprised with your book is how far you went back to the beginnings of the Feller legend and how big a star he was. Every bit the star that Ted Williams was, that Joe DiMaggio was, and they've had the big biographies. Why do you think Feller hasn't gotten the big biography yet?
There's several ways to answer that question. So I work in book publishing. I work at Penguin Random House, which is like the big hulking book publisher. And so, I edit books. I know a lot of editors, and you could never get a Bob Feller book through Penguin Random House now.
Why not?
I think that his star has fallen to such an extent that people just would say that there isn't the audience there. And even, I mean, you look at Bob Feller publishes several biographies throughout his lifetime. His first biography is in 1947, Strikeout Story. That is published by Doubleday, which at that time was the big book publishing company. And he's doing I mean, some of the more interesting things that you can see in the archives is that, and I don't think this is in the book, but when the Indians are on the road in 1947 and they're playing night games, Feller in St. Louis, Detroit, Chicago is going to the big department stores like Gimbel's or whatever and staging these huge autograph sessions for his book. There wasn't this sort of idea yet of, him reading at a bookstore and then having a signing or something like that. Like he was doing it through these big department stores, and they would last hours and hours and hours of Feller just signing these sorts of books. And so it was like a nationwide event to have Feller publish this book. His next autobiography is not until the 90s, and that's published by a vanity press. So he's fallen even that far in the 90s. He can't even get that book through a larger publisher. I think that some of it is through his own statements that he gives about Jackie Robinson and others in the 60s in particular, whenever he goes into the Hall of Fame. And things like that. I think that he also falls off at the late 60s whenever he has financial problems and marital problems and things like that. His name gets a little sullied. And then again, I think in the 70s, whenever he's just sort of out and about selling himself, like there's this sort of sense in the public that he's undignified and things like this, which again, I think people are completely misinterpreting him. He's one step ahead of everybody. So he falls off in a way that Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio don't. And it is curious because like you could say, well, the sort of racially insensitive statements are what caused him to do that. But at the same time, like, as we see from like the biography of Joe DiMaggio, I mean, DiMaggio is far from a saint. And like he himself is a very cantankerous and not exactly the nicest character. And Ted Williams, as we all know, is also extremely cantankerous. So you can't really chalk it up to the fact that Feller says these things. I think that you could maybe say that like that the fact that DiMaggio and Williams played in New York and Boston, that they got immortalized through Paul Simon songs, through David Halberstam, through all these other sorts of things, that keeps them in the public eye. But at the same time, Stan Musial got this big biography that happened, 10 years ago or something like that. And it was published through Penguin Random House, my own company. So it's kind of like, why hasn't Feller had that? I remember when I sold this book, someone told me that like outside of Satchel Paige, the only way you were going to get these individuals through a big publishing house was to package them together like this. And I don't know if that's the sort of Clevelandness, because I had people come up to me, not in my company, because I didn't publish the book through my company, but sort of through other ones being like, I don't understand why we bought this book. Like, it's about Cleveland. Is that really going to sell? And that is
Great.
that is a very New York attitude. I'm not from New York. I live in New York, but I'm not from here. And so like, that is such a New York attitude, just being like, it's Cleveland, who cares? And, I think that people have been surprised. Like my book has gone into a second printing, and I think it's possibly because people were surprised that there was an appetite for this sort of thing. So it could be sort of the provincialism of the publishing industry in New York City. It could be it could be certain ways that Feller himself doesn't seem to resonate in this time because people look at him very simplistically. It could be the fact that he played in Cleveland. I wish I could answer that, but it does seem like the big biography that Bob Feller deserves, because his story was known basically by every single person from 1936 through like 1948. There should be it, and I don't know why there isn't.
Well, the four players created a dynamic for you that really worked well, I thought.
Definitely.
They played against each other. The only one I would like to know a little more about would be Boudreaux. I knew he was from Illinois and such, but that's the only thing that I saw that was had me wanting more.
Yeah, and somebody's asked me that. They said, well, why wasn't Boudreaux the fifth person in here? And it was simply because, as I said, like, you take these four people, I thought they each represented an aspect of it. of that and of the integration experience. And Boudreaux just didn't quite fit into that dynamic. I mean, the thing is that a lot of people have said that this book is about the 1948 Indians, and I never thought of it that way. I thought about the book as being about these 4 individuals whose narratives happened to culminate on the 48 Indians. Because if it was about the 48 Indians, I would have gone into way more depth about Gene Bearden, about Dale Mitchell, about, you know, Joe Gordon, Ken Keltner, who you know, basically just makes a token appearance in the book, you know, all these sorts of these people that I don't give necessary weight to. But it's just because that I thought of the book as being about these 4 people and not necessarily about the club itself.
So Luke,
the reason that Boudreaux doesn't fit is because he's more beloved in Chicago and remembered in Chicago than he is in Cleveland. I hate to say that, but it's true. He was a broadcaster for the Cubs for many years, and Cleveland was his high point, but he was a Chicago guy at heart. So.
Yeah, my grandpa is from a small town called Watseka, which is about an hour and a half south of Chicago, and he's dead now, obviously, but I remember going to his house as a kid, and just, he always had the Cub game on. He's a huge Cubs fan. I'm a huge Cardinal fan. He's a huge Cub fan. We didn't necessarily, but and I just remember Lou Boudreaux's voice being on in his house constantly. It was like the soundtrack to my childhood. Lou Boudreaux's voice.
Yeah. Luke, given all that you've said, is this book a one and done for you, or a launch point for some other books, given what you found out?
I don't know. I've written about baseball in various publications. I'm a huge fan. But the problem is that I just don't know if I'm ever going to find I don't think I'm going to find a better story than this. Like, I'm just worried that if I do another baseball book, it's not going to be as, I mean, I'm not saying that like I wrote a great book or that, you know, that this is all that. I'm just saying that the story itself is so amazing. I mean, just so many aspects of like business and promotions and war and integration and all this sort of stuff all swirl together in this book that I might retire from baseball writing and move on to like basketball. So
wow.
No.
Interesting response. Thank you.
I know.
Well, Luke, one of the homeworks that I gave to the members here is to suggest our next book. Do you have any suggestions?
Do you guys only read books about Cleveland?
No, only books about baseball.
Oh, only books about baseball. Gosh, I don't know which ones you've read. Let me see if what my favorites are. I'm sure you've read all the Halberstam books.
Mm-hmm. Well, not by this Cup Club though, because we formed about a year ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Have you read John Thorne's book, Baseball in the Garden of Eden? Okay, yeah. I was gonna say that.
I've read. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't as easy a read as yours. Yours flowed very nicely. Again, a compliment. I thought John's was a little more difficult to digest. Very good, but more difficult to digest.
Thorne's is a little dated right now because of all the new research that's come out in the past decade. But it's a great starting point for anybody who wants to start learning about the early history of the game.
Yeah, definitely. I really loved, I mean, I'm sure you guys have probably already read a lot of these things. I love Jackie Robinson's I Never Had It Made. I thought that biography, I thought that was one of the best autobiographies of a baseball player that I've come across. Gosh, in terms of Cleveland, I mean, have you read Russell Schneider's The Boys of the Summer of '48? I'm sure you have. Yeah, because that was really good. I tried to talk to Russell Schneider, but this was before he passed away. He refused to cooperate with me for this project, unfortunately. He told me that he had extensive tapes of all of these players from all the way back to Wamsgas and then through, pretty much everybody on the 1948 Indians that he had never published, and that he was going to write a huge extensive book on these tapes that he had. And I was asking him if I could have access to the tapes, and he refused. And now that he's passed away, I've always wondered what happened to those tapes, and if they could be donated to a library or some sort of archive. So I don't know what happened to there.
It's sad.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. I'm sure you guys
What
have
was
just
the
read more than I have.
what was the book that won the SABR award last year about the moving of, or the story of the Dodgers moving
yeah.
from?
By Eric, I think it's by a guy named Eric Nussbaum.
Stealing
Feeling
home.
home.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That is great. Yeah,
Yes.
I love that one. Oh, I have to say that one of the most entertaining books that I came across in my research was by a guy named, I think his name was William Price Fox, and it's a book called Satchel Page's America. And the whole premise of the book is that in the 70s, when Page, it's the early 70s, this guy, William Price Fox, was a magazine writer. He gets an assignment from one of the big magazines to go do a feature on Satchel Paige in his old age. And what he does is he goes to Kansas City. He has sort of the advance money. This was back whenever magazines could pay you in advance. He has this sort of advance money, and he tells Satchel Paige, I will give you all of this if you allow me to just kind of hang around with you. And Page, who is a very tough subject to get around interviewers, agrees to this because Page was kind of always spending money, always kind of in need of it. And it is the most intimate portrait of Satchel Paige that I've seen. I mean, I'm sure that we've all read Larry Tye's biography, which is fantastic, one of the best baseball books out there. But this is a book about what it means to hang out with Satchel Paige in a bar, in a restaurant, at his house, everything like that. And he goes around and talks to sort of old Negro leaguers that had played with Page and things like that. It is like, if you've ever wanted to spend a weekend with Satchel Paige, this is the book for you. I loved it. Satchel Paige's America.
Well, guys, any 48 stories to share?
I think it's before all our times, unfortunately. I remember, I tell you a story how I first really found out about the 48 Indians. Does anybody remember the old, I think it was a Random House series of baseball books for kids?
No,
No? Okay. Well,
No.
I'm dating myself. This was a series from the I'd say the mid 60s to the mid 70s, more or less, or maybe I got old enough by that time to move on to other things. But they did a book called Amazing Baseball Teams. And there was a chapter about the 48 Indians. And I was hooked. And that's one of the things that really got me interested in baseball because, Luke has caught on to it. It's such a fascinating story. And you think, Luke, if the Indians had lost the playoff game, would your book have been published?
No. I mean, it's tough. It's tough to get a book about the Indians published. All the stars aligned there.
Yeah, and because it's still a great story, but if you don't have the capper of the Indians winning the World Series, somehow in the eyes of the decision makers, I guess, it goes from being publishable to not being publishable.
Yeah,
that's kind of a shame, but that's the way things are.
Yeah, and like I was kind of uneasy about that idea of the book being so like inspirational, almost like because it was inspirational in a sense to the city, but like I really wanted to put that epilogue on there to sort of be like, this didn't solve things for Larry Doby. Like, this didn't solve things for any of these four characters.
Mhm.
Like, it really, the original title of the book was The First Fine Careless Rapture, which is what Bill Veeck, and in fact, the original introduction of the book that I did that my publisher hated and made me change, was Bill Veeck in the 1970s. He's living in the early 70s. He's living in Maryland, sort of in a small town there by the water. And the Indians are on such hard times in the early 70s that there's sort of talk that they're going to be moving to like New Orleans, to Seattle, to places like that the team is going to do it. So a lot of reporters are traveling to Maryland and they're asking Bill Veeck, hey, why don't you just buy the Indians? Like, why don't you go back there, buy the Indians, re-inject your magic into Cleveland? And Veeck always tells these people, you can never recapture the first fine careless rapture. And he sort of laying out the reasons why he could never do this again. Like, baseball has lost its primacy in the national consciousness. Like, it was just a special time whenever everything aligned. And so I felt like that for each of the four characters. Like, this was the first fine careless rapture that these men chased throughout the rest of their life. My publisher hated the title. So we had to change it to Our Team, which, is fine. But I wish I could have been called that, because that's the way I felt about it. That this is the inspirational story is there, but it's also kind of fool's gold. Like, it doesn't change things.
Hey, Luke, great book. Thanks for writing it. Hey, what about where Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson are front and center, but you don't hear as much about Larry Doby and Bill Veeck?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a piece for the Washington Post right now that's kind of be about that. I do think that like decisions that Major League Baseball has made about how to commemorate its inaugural seasons of integration have shaped that process. I think that the way that they've retired Robinson's number, they do Jackie Robinson Day, all these sorts of things, it makes it seem as though the story of integration is the story of Jackie Robinson, or at least like it doubles as the story of Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey. And it has this sort of tendency of obscuring or overshadowing all these other pioneers whose stories were happening not years afterward, but concurrently at the same time. And so I do think that we do need to have some sort of annual celebration of Larry Doby that can then sort of serve as an alternate story of all these other pioneers that were happening at the same time. And, as my book kind of shows, Negro League owners were not exactly thrilled with Branch Rickey, and celebrating Branch Rickey is on the one hand necessary and deserved, but on the other hand should also be sort of complicated and sort of thought about differently. I think that the way Bill Veeck went about it deserves to be mentioned as well, because Negro League owners were much happier with the route that Veeck established, and so by not giving that equal thrift, we are doing a disservice to that narrative. So yeah, hopefully that's going to be in the Post on July 5th. So I'll send it around to Dave, and then he can pass it around.
You have to.
Cool.
Luke, speaking of Bill Veeck, there are people that love Bill Veeck and other people not so much because of the showmanship and I don't know, I guess purist is one word to use. People that don't care for the fireworks and they want to see baseball on the field. Did you get a sense of that in your interviews and in your work on the book?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, whenever Veeck was when Veeck first came to the Indians in 1946, it was really all that people could talk about was this sort of idea that he was creating a sort of carnivalization of the sport. There's a great article that I couldn't put in where the Indians are playing on a Monday, a makeup game in Cleveland, and the Red Sox, who they're playing the next Tuesday, are already in town. and Joe Cronin and some others on the Red Sox are attending the game to sort of get a sense of who the Indians are. And they're looking around at the crowds coming in on a Monday. And these are like 40, 50,000 people in 1946 when the Indians are not in the playoff race, and being like, why are all these people here? Where are they coming from on a Monday? I mean, just this sort of like the way that they responded, the fans responded to Vec's promotional savvy was really something. But I mean, obviously, you know, with the whole Max Patkin thing and Johnny Price and things like that, I mean, you saw so much criticism of that, particularly in the New York papers, I found. And Vec himself kind of used the Yankees as like a counterpoint throughout, I mean, basically his career as being the sort of buttoned up, you know, pinstriped franchise that was too dignified to do what he was doing. He liked to use them as a foil. And so a lot of the New York press kind of assumed that attitude about Vec. But, you know, I mean, Vec I found such incredible similarities between Vec and Page in particular, and even Vec, Page, and Feller. I mean, these were men who were their own PR machines, who really took their stories and used them as currency. Like, they were telling their stories over and over and over throughout their lives. I mean, these were men, each one of those men wrote more than one autobiography. In some way, their story was their currency. And I mean, I think it's interesting to contrast that to Larry Doby, who never wrote an autobiography and who really did not like to talk to the press at all, was a much more reticent individual, very sort of skeptical of talking. He was a much tougher nut to crack. But like, you look at Vec, Page, and Feller, they all knew how to use their stories, how to embellish them, how to sometimes even just make stuff up. Like, it's sort of a tough, you know, you had to sort of figure out, like, if you look at Bob Feller in particular, his stories grow way taller over time. He knew, you know, he was going from making $5 pitching in Iowa when he was a teenager to suddenly making 100. And, you know, you had to sort of figure out what was real and what was not.
There was one moment in 1948 that I thought might get a little more attention in the book, and that was the exhibition game in Cleveland against the Dodgers. Did you consider giving that more attention than it finally got?
That was cut by my editor. Yeah, that was cut. Yeah, I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say the game where Lou Boudreau sort of injured his ankle, and
another good one.
He pinch hits and you know, gets this big sort of hit, and that was one of the ones where we had to say, like, this is a book about these four people. Like, that's a great moment, but it doesn't really involve them, and so, like, you can take it out. One of the interesting moments in 1948 that we haven't talked about, but that I thought was going to form a huge moment, was in spring training. If you read Bill Vec's Vec as in Rec, and if you read sort of other accounts, even Vec's biography that was then published by Paul Dixon, and the Larry Doby biography that was published by Joseph Thomas Moore, apparently they say that in spring training of 1948, Larry Doby, you know, is not expected to make the team. He does extremely well in spring training. They do this sort of cross-country tour on the way back to Cleveland against the Giants. And Vec says that they go to, you know, they go to Lubbock, then they go to Texarkana, and then they go to Houston. And Doby kind of has problems in all of them. In Texarkana, people are throwing bottles at him. And then in Houston, the fans are just razzing him constantly, to the point where Boudreau's like, oh, do I even pull him? And then he hits this mammoth home run that kind of just flies out of the stadium. And that's whenever they were like, oh, Doby's on the team. That home run solidified his place. And so I was thinking, like, this is going to be a very dramatic part of the book. And then I was going through the archives in Texas. I couldn't find it. Like, it's not there. And I was looking at the Indians' schedule through spring training. They did not play in Texarkana or in Houston in 1948. They did play in Lubbock, and you can find tons of articles in the Lubbock papers from 1948. But then they swing up through Oklahoma City, over to Wichita, and then into Indiana. And so I realized that they played in Houston in 1949. And you can find that Doby home run that he hits there. And I realized that, like, if you look, I think the first instance of this idea that Doby made the team through that home run is a couple years later when Beck would talk about it during his speeches, and he's conflating 1948 and 1949. And then that just kind of becomes canon, that Doby makes the team because of that home run. You can see it basically in every other book published about this throughout, the years. But it's just not true. And Doby makes the team not through that home run, but just because Boudreau is like, he's having such an incredible spring training. Let's just keep him on the team for a month and see what happens. And so during that 48 season, like, Doby is sort of continually being threatened with getting sent down. And just right before he's about to, he does something incredible. And Boudreau's like, whoa, okay, let's keep him. So in some ways, I think that's as dramatic as him, hitting this home run that, they thought he did. So anyway, that's a part of the book that also might seem missing to a lot of people, but it just didn't happen.
Luke, as a person who's never written a book, and following up Morris's question, you sadly had a lot of chapters hit the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
Right? Did those have a way of finding another life somewhere else, or are they just gone forever?
It's really sad because there's a lot of great details in there, and I worked really hard on some of them, like the war chapters. I think I had a lot more. I just felt like I had a lot more detail about specific things, like the Bob Feller 1946 tour. Had this sort of great section in there where, like, they're playing. I think they play like 5 games in 2 days, and at one point, I can't remember the player now. He literally falls asleep on the field because he's just so tired. And it's like, these men were playing games until late at night, and then they were getting on planes and flying into the next city and not getting to their hotel until 2 or 3 in the morning and then getting up. I mean, there was just this incredible pace that they were at, but it kind of mirrored Feller's own pace in 1946 when he comes back and just kind of wants to do it all after the war. And I wish that I could have kept it in there, but
Allow me to suggest a baseball research journal.
Yeah. I think that's. I wanted to do an article about Veck in theater, because after Veck sells the Indians, he comes back to Cleveland and stars in a production of The Man Who Came to Dinner, and they change the script in certain ways to sort of put in references to the Indians and baseball and things like that. And I collected a lot of articles about the way that was covered, and Veck doing rehearsals and stuff like that. And I just think that, like, what Veck was doing in baseball was also theater. And so I wanted to sort of do something like that with baseball research journals. So maybe I can get some details in there, but I don't know, I mean, right now, unfortunately, those chapters are just gone.
Who owns them?
I guess I could, I guess that I could put them on a website or something like that, but yeah, it's too bad. But as I said, I had a word count, and I mean, I'm not unhappy with the way the book turned out. I think that the book
shouldn't be.
I think the book flows really well, and I think I wanted it to be a page turner. That's what I wanted, to sort of have people that had never heard of this story be like, whoa, like there's something here. And if they wanted to research more deeply into it, there are plenty of books that do that. Yeah.
You mentioned the F. Manley papers.
Yeah.
Is there a full printed version of the unedited, 400 pages, whatever it was?
Of the F. Manley papers?
Of your book, of our team.
Oh,
I mean, do people do that anymore?
Obviously, I have the first draft, which, as I said, is around 200,000 words. And it was, it's the draft that I sent to my editor. So that exists. I mean, I have all the versions that we did. I mean, I think that the first drafts, I think that the problem that I had with this book is because it's about 4 different people, the way that I wrote it was I wrote a chapter about Feller, a chapter about Vec, a chapter about Dobie and all that. But the way that the final book is that these men are sort of more swirled. And so one of the things that we really worked on in the editing process was trying to not have them be so separate and putting them together in almost like puzzle pieces. You know, and so the first version of the book is so different. The first version of the book starts with Vec. As I said, it's the introduction is about Vec, then the first chapter is about Vec. And because I really thought Vec was the most important person in this book. He's the one who brings them together. Without Vec, these people would, their paths would not have crossed. But then he sort of convinced me that start with the Bob Feller story. And I think he was right. Because like, the way that then I started thinking about it is it starts with the Bob Feller origin story, which I think is still the greatest origin story of an athlete that you could ever imagine. It is an incredible story, but then it ends with the Larry Dobie origin story. And I think the Larry Dobie origin story is as incredible as anything else, where you have this player going overnight to the major leagues, failing basically, and then having this miraculous turnaround that without that, the Indians never would have come close to the pennant. And then, you know, having this incredible World Series, like that origin story is as improbable and as, you know, exciting as the Bob Feller origin story. So you have this sort of like balance to the book from start to end. And I think that that was a very astute comment by my editor, and I think it works well.
Were you able to talk to any family members of these four guys and get any feedback from them?
I was. Some of them were more cooperative than others. The Bob Feller family was actually extremely cooperative. His son, Steve Feller, I had numerous conversations with him, and Steve helped set up a trip to Van Meter for me. I got to tour the Feller barn. I talked to Feller's second wife, Ann Feller, who told me a lot about his military service. And I talked to at least one member of each family. I talked to Gregory Vec, Myra Vec, and Mike Vec for the Vec family. The Dobie family was much more reticent. The only person I was really able to reach was Larry Dobie Jr. And he and I talked a lot about the sort of the meaning of the photo for Larry Dobie. Unfortunately, he was born after Larry Dobie had, you know, gone through this 1948 period, and he said that his dad was not very forthcoming about his sort of accomplishments and careers, that it was tough to sort of get these stories out of him. In terms of Larry Dobie, there were two individuals that really helped me. One was the guy named Al Kachadurian, who is in his late 90s. He lives in an assisted living home in New Jersey. He was Larry Dobie's starting quarterback on his high school team. Knew Larry Dobie throughout his entire life, went to high school with him, and he's sharp as a tack, just remembers everything. And he really gave me a good picture of Dobie before his fame. And then a guy named Jerry Eisenberg, who is an accomplished writer on his own. He wrote for a Newark paper throughout most of his life. And what is interesting about him is that he lived next to Larry Dobie. He'd done some interviews with him, and the two men sort of hit it off. And he said one night when it was raining, it almost sounds like a movie script, Dobie came over to his house and just said, "I need to get some stuff off my shoulders." And he just proceeded to tell Jerry Eisenberg all of this sort of anger and frustration and stuff that he had still inside of him about the racism that he faced, all the sort of abuses and slights and everything like that. And he also, Jerry Eisenberg said that like he harbored extreme antipathy toward Lou Boudreau. Dobie felt like Boudreau did not help him ease his transition, that he was not on his side a lot of the time whenever this happened in the early seasons, that Dobie just was kind of almost like he needed to go to therapy. And he had this inside of him, and he chose Jerry Eisenberg to unload this on. And so Dobie would come over, and it almost like the two men were in a therapy session. And Eisenberg said that he told Dobie at one point, you know, you are the bitterest ex-athlete I've ever seen. Eisenberg has written about this. It is in a book called, I think, Through My Eyes or something like that. So this is not new that I'm saying, but you know, I mean, I think it's really interesting that Dobie, that's how Dobie, that he carried it that long on him and then sort of unloaded it. In the terms of Page, there was a SABR event in Kansas City where every single living child of Satchel Paige got together and did a conference talking about their father. And so I was lucky to go to that and then afterward sit down with them and talk to them about them. But they'd all been born after Page had made it into the majors. So yeah, I mean, there's only so much you can sort of get through the children.
You also in the notes, I was impressed that you contacted relatives of people that Dobie had stayed with.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? And
Yeah.
and how did you go about that? Because I thought that added some very good stuff.
Yeah, Dobie stayed with a Black family in Cleveland. The daughter is still alive. I can't remember exactly how old she was. She was maybe 6 or 8 when Dobie was there, so she remembered him. And she also remembered, this isn't in there because this would have happened in 1949. Satchel Paige then stayed with them in spring training in 1949, and she said that like Paige would, I mean, he was such a celebrity that pretty much the entirety of Black Tucson, all the Black people in Tucson came over to the house every night, and Paige would sit by the side of the house and just kind of tell stories all night long, things like that. You know, whereas Dobie, I think, was much more reticent, and she was saying that even during the first few days, he just simply didn't talk. It was like you had to sort of allow him to open up and give him room and space and things like that. And then in terms of, Dobie stayed with a guy named Arthur Choker Grant, who was kind of almost like a father figure to so many athletes in Cleveland. He was good friends with Jesse Owens. He was good friends with Marion Motley and others and things like that. So his house was a hub of athletic activity. And his daughters remember all of this very well. They still live in Cleveland, which is really great. I was also able to spend a weekend with Eddie Robinson, the only living member of the 1948 Indians. And it was an interesting experience. You know, I mean, he remembers everything. He was sharp as a tack. He was very gracious. I'm extremely thankful for him. I do think that he was one of the ones that did not shake Dobie's hand. When I asked him point blank if he had, he simply said, "I don't remember," which strikes me as odd because he seemed to remember everything. And you know, being from where he was, I think at one point he told me that he was from Texas and he didn't like the fact that the Indians were the first one to integrate, that he didn't like being a sort of guinea pig. And I could just get the sense that, I mean, it gave me a good sense of how somebody who was skeptical about integration at that time thought about it. I didn't want to take Eddie Robinson through the ringer in the book. That wasn't my intention. But it was an enlightening experience for me to talk to him. Anyway.
Anybody else have a question? Well, Luke, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
We've really had a great hour here. You answered all our questions, and it's been a good experience.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It was great.
And thanks for a great book.
Oh,
Would
thank
like
you.
to leave you on our list so you can participate later?
I'd love to.
I'll keep
Yeah,
sending you.
if you guys like the book, I'm sure there are other Indians fans that you all know. Spread the word. You know, this is a book that's kind of spreading through word of mouth, which is great. And that's you know, I've gotten really great responses from people.
Well, this has been recorded, so SABR members all over can watch this.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's great.
So we'll share the link too, so people can get the word out there. It's
Cool.
nice to hear the original guy and get some questions answered.
Cool.
I've really enjoyed this, and I really appreciate your joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah.
And please keep us in touch with any other books that we ought to read, and I'm interested in the publishing industry too.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of books do you edit?
I work on a lot of fiction and nonfiction, sort of commercial stuff. For the most part, I can't say that I really work on a lot of sports books. And I mean, it all depends on. I'm not saying that a Bob Feller book couldn't be published. I think that if like David Halberstam had said when he was still alive, "Hey, my next book is a Bob Feller book," everybody would be like, "Great, let's do it." It's just it's just like this book that I did. You have to find the right angle, the sort of I think if I would have gone to my publisher and been like, "I'm writing a book about the 1948 Indians," I'd have been like, eh. But if you say I'm writing a book about these 4 people and it's about integration and it's about this and that, that's exciting to them. So there's certainly ways that you can get a book through that's about these sorts of things. You just have to find the right angle and the right hook to do it.
Has the Kindle and the electronic aspect opened up some possibilities that didn't exist a while ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's never been easier to sort of self-publish and to get your book out there right now. And there was this sort of fear that like electronic books was going to cause the death of traditional publishers like the one I work for. That just simply hasn't been the case. Like we've done very well with electronic books, and it's really helped to expand our audience. Right now, particularly the rise of audiobooks is what's really fueling us. Like more and more people, because they have iPhones and stuff like that, are choosing just to listen. And that has been, audiobooks in terms of our sales have just skyrocketed. So yeah,
the promotional aspect of publishing is so important. You can write a great book, but we don't find out about it. And, we have to choose among the few that we can actually get read. So,
yeah, we call it discoverability. And that's always the struggle, to get people to sort of discover it. That's why I say like word of mouth for a book like mine is really crucial. Like if Indians fans find out about it, like that's the way for us to spread the word. So I appreciate it.
Well, you're certainly entitled and welcome.
Thank you.
Is it time to wrap it up?
Well, Dave, it seems like we're coming to a nice positive closure. This has been really great, I think.
Yeah. It's been very good. Thanks, guys, for coming. And I didn't hear any nominations for the next book. This is your last chance, or you'll have to live with whatever selection I make. That's a threat.
It works for me.
Okay. I'll get an email out soon. And once again, thank you, Luke. I appreciate you coming.
Hey, it was great to meet you all.
Thank you, Luke. Appreciate it.
All right,
Okay.
thanks. Hope to see you all in Cleveland. All right, bye.
Over
I
now.
nominate Stealing Home, Dave.
Stealing Home? Okay.
Over now, gang.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks.